So this is the iPhone 7, originally released in September 2016. This thing is getting on a bit now, but considering it's still the most popular and one of the cheapest new iPhones in the world, as well as being my main phone for a pretty long time now, so I thought that today we might as well take a look at it and see if it's worth your hard-earned cash in 2019. First of all, we have the specs. The iPhone 7 features the Apple A10 processor, which is still fine by today's standards, 2GB of RAM, either 32, 128, or on special models, 256GB of internal storage. The iPhone 7 also has a screen resolution of 750 by 1334, which we'll be talking about in more detail later on, and it weighs in at just 138 grams, which is actually pretty light by today's standards. Because this is an iOS device, I don't really find specs to be as important, and while they're definitely something to look at on Android because there's so many different versions of the OS that it would be impossible to optimize for everything, so getting as much power as you possibly can for a smooth experience is certainly a consideration when it comes to Android. With iOS, however, because there's less devices, Apple can dedicate resources to optimize every single one of their phones. Next, we have the build quality. Now, this is actually one of the main reasons why I still, to this day, use the iPhone 7. The iPhone 7 is made out of 7000 series aluminium, which basically means it's super durable, but it doesn't make the phone feel cheap. As someone who is super uncoordinated, an aluminium back was a must for me, as despite using it with a case, my old Samsung S8 ended up broken within 7 months. As these are premium phones, the cost of repairing smashed backs can often be huge. In fact, it's often cheaper to just buy a new used version of that phone, rather than to get it fixed. Sucks. So when I made the switch to an iPhone, a durable back was an absolute must. Another strength in the build quality is what Apple refers to as the pure sapphire lens. And if we take a closer look at my iPhone lens, we can see that the paint is kind of scratched. More on that later, but the lens is totally clean. As someone who uses their phone for photos and videos all the time, it's super important that my camera stays in good condition. So whatever this is, despite the controversy about this not actually being true sapphire, it has managed to stay super clean. Going back to the paint scratches, I found that with pretty much every matte black iPhone 7 I've ever seen, there has been an issue with the paint coming off, especially when used with a case. I don't know why this is, and it doesn't seem to be an issue on the silver model, but on the black model, over the span of a few months, there is a good chance that some paint may come off. This isn't personally a deal breaker for me, as I use this gorgeous leather case with mine anyway, but it is something to be aware of nonetheless. The iPhone 7 is also IP67 water resistant, which, while not being IP68 with that extra half a meter of water resistance, is still a super nice addition, and the 1 hour of water resistance, while not something to rely on, is a nice failsafe. I will be talking more about the quality of the screen later on, but overall, I am very impressed. Speaking of the screen, while not mind-blowingly high-res or large, especially for 2019, it's nice and bright at 603 nits, and again, works great. In terms of build quality, throughout my, again, very clumsy ownership, it hasn't broken on me once. Granted, I have been using a screen protector for the last few months, but before that, nothing, and it lasted fine. Force Touch was also something new that Apple added onto this iPhone, and although it's a standard feature now, if you haven't tried it yet, it will literally change the way that you interact with your phone forever. To activate it, press lightly on your phone, then press slightly harder, and you should feel a click like the home button, and you should see something appear. Now, this could be anything from drop-down buttons to shortcuts to even something like sharing. I've been using it for a while, and I like it so much that I honestly don't think I could ever go back to anything without it. In terms of button quality and placement, I'd say this is perhaps one of the strongest points of iPhones in general. They're usually very well mapped out, good quality, nice and tactile, and I'm pleased to say on the iPhone 7 and 8, I think they might be the best ever. Gone are the connected volume buttons from the 6 models, and they've been replaced with 2 much nicer separate buttons for volume up and down, which is fantastic, especially if you keep a case on your phone like me. With the separate buttons, you get less misadjustments, which just adds on to that overall user experience, important for any premium device. Next to it is a feature that I wish was available on every phone on the market, simply put, the mute switch. Whenever you need to, literally at the flick of a switch, you can flip your phone into silent mode, and simply put, I love this feature. Whenever I'm somewhere quiet and my phone goes off, I can simply flick the switch, and because of the tactility, I usually don't even have to take my phone out my pocket. Again, every phone in the world should have this feature, and it may not sound like much, but it really is. The lock button is isolated on the right side of the phone, so you'll never accidentally hit the volume button like I did with other phones I've had, and it's just as tactile as all the other buttons, so no complaints here. This was also the first phone that Apple released not to feature the headphone jack, which, while super controversial at the time, isn't really that big of a deal. If your iPhone doesn't come with an adapter, you can pick up an official Apple one for $8 or a Google one for $12. The reasoning behind removing the headphone jack was mainly to add a speaker, which we're going to be talking about more later on. Now we have something that I wasn't sure whether I'd like or not, which at the time was a new addition to this phone. Simply put, the Force Touch home button. I was coming from a Galaxy S8 which had one under the screen, but compared to an older iPhone such as the SE, it can feel a little weird at first. If you didn't already know, it's not actually a physical button, but a static piece that's flush with the bottom bezel, and it gets its click from Apple's Taptic engine, like on the newer MacBooks. This is actually the same engine that's now in Apple's trackpad, so you have those Force Touch trackpads on the MacBooks. That's the same engine. There are 3 settings. I personally use the third one because it feels the most like a real home button, and I've had very few problems with it. Some people love it and some people hate it, but I personally really like it. It's always been super convenient to be able to go home at the click of a button, as well as opening your currently running apps. This was initially one of the main things holding me back from the 10 models, which in hindsight was probably not the best reason, but there's just something nice about having a dedicated home button, like on my S8. Following on from this, we have the camera, which in my opinion, as well as a lot of my friends' opinions, is a really important part of the phone. The iPhone 7 features a 12 megapixel main camera with an aperture of f1.8, and it's honestly pretty good. I do think it's a shame they decided not to add the dual camera like they did in the 7 and 8 Plus, but I guess you get what you pay for in that regard. This does mean no portrait mode, or as previously mentioned, crazy bokeh, but the colors are great thanks to that dedicated image processor, and in my opinion, this is heavily overlooked when it comes to talking about phone cameras. Too often I find that people look too much into the spec sheet because again, 12 megapixels isn't crazy. In fact, a while ago I took a look at that Nokia phone with like 40 megapixel cameras, but the colors and sharpness weren't very good, whereas with the iPhone, they are. All these photos were shot on the iPhone 7. In fact, a few days ago, I shot this thumbnail with the iPhone 7, processed it in Lightroom, and no one negatively commented on the thumbnail. Comparing the iPhone to the similarly spec camera on the S8, here's a thumbnail I edited in exactly the same way back in November, and as we can see, the difference is crazy. Don't get me wrong, this isn't to complain about the camera quality of the Samsung S8. I actually really like that phone. This is more comparing the photos of 2 similarly spec cameras that I'm very used to, and overall I'm very pleased with the iPhone 7 for photos. When we get into video, this phone can shoot 4K up to 30 FPS, 1080p slow-mo at 120 FPS, and 720p slow-mo at 240 FPS. The 240 FPS is significantly lower quality than the 120p option, so I don't really use it, but if you want to see more details about how this phone works in video, and how it compares to this $3,000 monster that I'm shooting this video on, just click up there. The 4K does look super nice, and while the app's a little bare bones for my liking, it is possible to get some super nice video with the iPhone 7. In fact, I've actually used this as a B cam on many occasions where this camera's been preoccupied, and I'm always pretty impressed with the results. The slow motion is good, but there is slightly less dynamic range than with the standard 30p recordings, and I also noticed a significant hit on the autofocus when you start to shoot these higher frame rates. So if you do need critical focus, I recommend downloading the Pro Movie app. It's only $2.99, and you get full manual control over the video features as well as higher bit rates. So if you're super into shooting video with your phone, then Pro Movie might be a good option. Overall, I'm very pleased with this camera, and while I could talk for ages about it, I've been talking for way too long already. I mean, being honest, most people are just going to use this thing for selfies anyway. It does those too at 7 megapixels. Quality's pretty good. Moving on to what separates iPhones in general from the rest of the phones on the market, the OS. It's an iPhone, so obviously it runs iOS, and at the moment I actually have the iOS 13 beta installed, but throughout all my testing with this phone on iOS 12, it worked fantastically well. Even though this was a late 2016 release, to me, this feels like a new phone. Apps all run smoothly, especially social media, which is something I've found consistent with iOS, and again, this just adds a more consistent premium feel to the phone. Another great thing about iOS in general is simply how long they support their older phones. Generally, an iPhone will get 5 iterations of iOS. There are 2 left on the iPhone 7, including iOS 13 because it's not technically released yet, so I do expect this phone to last for at least another 2 years, which I think was actually the standard support time for my S8 from new. So for a 2016 release, this is really nice to see. Going back to the hardware, we have the speakers. As I said before, one of them replaced the headphone jack, and it honestly sounds pretty good. Another great thing is that the earpiece speaker can actually be used in conjunction with the downward firing speaker for a stereo effect, which actually sounds pretty good. Some people complained early on about the volume being inconsistent, but honestly, I've had no problems with it. It's sharp, not terrifically bassy, and in no way a replacement for a proper speaker or pair of headphones, but if you need to hear something quickly, then this does the job. One concern with me for this phone was the battery life. It's not a huge battery at 1960 milliamp hours, and paired with this bright screen as well as the age of the phone, I wasn't sure how well it'd do. However, I am pretty pleased. Now, my battery health is pretty good at 98%, and on average, I get around 5 to 8 hours per day depending on use, which I'm fine with because I'm usually not away from a charger for any longer than that. Overall, the iPhone 7, as I said earlier, is still the most popular iPhone in the world, and for good reason. It's now reasonably priced, will last through 2 more versions of iOS, and if you buy it used, as long as you check the battery health, you can get a really capable phone that certainly won't be a slouch when it comes to an everyday driver. So, what do you guys think of the iPhone 7? Do you have one? Do you want to buy one? Did you have one on upgrade? These are all things that I would love to hear down below in the comments. I do try my best to respond to every single comment that I get, but for now, thank you guys for watching. Remember to like the video. If you want to see more content like this, then smash that subscribe button. I'm trying to hit 10K by the end of July, so every single subscription is massively appreciated. I'm done for now, and I will see you guys in the next one.
Rolled up in that big truck with them guns up for them fuck boys. Smoked out in that Rolls Royce, blowing dope with that bad broad. Shawty know what I got cash, I'm throw it all if she want that. Every time you see me out, I blow trees out my blunt fat, cause I'm rich. Dumping the clip on a bitch, they hold her smoking, I exit the switch. Step to the mic, got the venomous spit. She steady working it, twerk on the dick. I'm with the shit and I get